I use wandering monsters, and you should too. Let's start with the question we must have all asked ourselves at one time or another. Why do all the monsters living in dungeons suffer from hearing loss? Or maybe their hearing is fine, they just choose to ignore all the murdering going on in the next room. After some epic battle with spells, clashing steel, and growling fiends, why do neighboring monsters just sit there like it's another day at the office? From one encounter to the next, it's not uncommon for your group of adventurers to find no collective response from all the slicing and dicing and bashing and spells that go boom. In fact, it seems the inhabitants of adjoining rooms are found exactly as described in the adventure module's description. Just doing their own thing, completely oblivious to the sounds of battle which had disturbed their lairs just a few moments earlier. Have you as a player or DM ever been faced with a situation like this? What's going on? Does life in a dungeon cause severe damage to eardrums? Can't monsters hear what's going on in the room next to them? If your PCs are visiting a town and burn down the local tavern, do the local residents just ignore them? They all react, right? The PCs may end up being run out of town by an angry mob. So why is it often so very different in dungeons, where the heroes are able to go room to room and methodically kill the inhabitants without any organized attempt to repel them? Are we to believe that evil creatures won't work together, or they're so frightened of leaving their little dungeon lairs that they just ignore the screams of their neighbors being slaughtered? In the days of first edition AD&D, it was often even worse, with the monsters allowing the intruders to rest, regain spells, and heal up, undisturbed while just patiently waiting in their designated areas. They just hang out, waiting for the dungeon invaders. The monsters were so polite about this, just waiting for invaders to rest up and regain their spells. It was such a gentler time then. The Forgotten Temple of Tharisdan was one major exception to this. From the early days of adventure design, giving us instructions regarding the forces of the temple working together to repel the intruders. I've also covered the Lost Caverns of Socanth, which was easily one of the worst offenders of this logic gap between monster layers and their responses to intruders, and even to each other. I loved that module, but the groups of extremely powerful monsters living in caves no more than 60 feet apart, with very little of a logical ecosystem existing in that adventure, just made no sense. Long before the players even arrived, you have to ask yourself, what in the heck are these monsters eating? And then when the heroes arrive, killing their neighbors, nobody responds. They just sit there, waiting to be next. I really wish Goodman Games had had the opportunity to redo the Lost Caverns of Socanth as part of their original Adventures Reincarnated line. They could have added so much depth to that. Maybe the chambers had some sort of magic trapping the monsters. Maybe the chambers are a sort of prison or zoo for the half-demon Socanth. But as presented, there's just no logical explanation for all these huge monsters living so close to one another in such an apparently relaxed state. As I stated in my review of that adventure, I love it, but now years later, I'm able to recognize my admiration comes from the cool monsters it gave us, rather than anything to do with the originality of the adventure itself, which we have to remember was a tournament module. So while possibly taking up an hour or more of actual game time, for your characters, a bloody, chaotic battle may have been less than 30 seconds. But that's still a lot of time for a lot of noise to have suddenly been generated. Why are the occupants of all the other rooms ignoring it? Are the monsters in TTRPGs all hearing impaired? Are sudden violent outbreaks a typical event in dungeons? Sudden bursts of sound followed by silence? Maybe. How after this has occurred are the occupants of every nearby chamber not ready for conflict? Isn't it more than likely they would at least prepare an ambush, maybe pretending to be asleep or hiding as they wait for the intruders? If we're talking about non-living guards with instructions to await a specific set of triggering events to occur before a response is possible, that's understandable. If we're talking about monsters that lack mobility, that's obviously going to hinder their potential response to invaders. But what about everything else? Do all the monsters fear one another? Do they all hate each other? Do any monsters have alliances between one another? Even chaotic evil monsters with any degree of intelligence would see the benefit of at least pretending to abide by an alliance with a neighboring monster for a variety of reasons. Is there some higher authority in the dungeon capable of calling the monstrous inhabitants into action for defense of the lair? A game master may design a dungeon environment with the idea that players will go room to room clearing it out. But if the inhabitants of these dungeons are to be all believable, even in these weird fantasy settings, shouldn't they be more responsive to the player's actions? And what happens if the players find themselves not as the intended strike team surgically eliminating their foes, but now they must fight a near army of desperate monsters all unified under a greater threat? The threat posed by the players. So how do you handle this? I made the decision that the inhabitants of these layers do not in fact suffer from hearing loss, and in most cases will seek to defend their homes from intruders. If they become alerted to the presence of invaders, the creatures will prepare themselves, and they will set traps, and they will attempt to surprise the invaders who attempt to enter their chambers. More intelligent monsters may even work together, setting aside differences temporarily to defeat a common foe. Weaker monsters might hide or retreat to avoid being killed. I recommend bringing your environments to life. The actions of the players should have repercussions, and if necessary, consequences. Bringing your dungeons to life also means adding some unexpected variety to your locations. And one very effective technique every game master should be using is the addition of wandering monster charts. If you are playing Dungeons & Dragons and you want more complete information on random encounters, and you're looking at the 2014 edition, check out the 5th edition DMG from pages 85 to 87. I realize some game masters believe these slow down the adventures, and there's a belief by some that wandering monsters can turn your game into a grind. But the reality is that's a fault of the game master, not the wandering monsters. In fact, these types of random encounters should be every bit as interesting as any planned encounter. Random encounters offer the game master freedom to improvise. What are the motivations of these wandering creatures? Why are they there? Did they just stumble on the player characters by accident? Were they sent to confront the heroes? As a game master, you could have so much fun with these unplanned encounters. You could simply treat them as mindless hostiles, or you could give them personality and allow them to interact with the players. Even deeply evil creatures aren't necessarily just going to attack the player's characters, especially intelligent ones. Maybe these creatures are spies. Maybe they lie to the players about their intentions. The point is, wandering monsters allow the game master one of their best opportunities to have fun and add variety and creativity to any adventure. Between acknowledging the consequences of heroes invading an enemy layer, where these monsters might temporarily unite to defeat the heroes, to unplanned wandering monsters with improvised motivations. Maybe they caught the players by surprise. The game master has the power to turn any published adventure into their own unique creation. A game's referee could always remember that published adventures are really just ideas from which they can and should paint in their own details. Craft your own story. You're allowed to make any changes you deem necessary. You're encouraged to breathe life into these dungeons. Go beyond the scope of what is presented on the printed pages. Once you own that adventure, it is yours. You are the dungeon master. You can make it exactly the way you want. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. I'm your host and friend, Atten, here at Love TTRPGs, and I hope you do the thing down below, you know the thing, to help this video get noticed. I love hearing from you. Thanks you so much for watching.